Blockchain is a team sport. And if we're going to move everything forward, we need to think about shared infrastructure and shared ideas.
Very excited about blockchain, about this idea that we could share a data set, that we could see this together, transparency.
And I love the fact that it's both immediate gratification and good for the world, right? That's a perfect balance.
And this age of distributed intelligence might be an age where the promise of the digital economy is finally fulfilled.
Hello, and welcome to this Blockchain Revolution Global session on blockchain associations. As we've heard throughout this event, blockchain is a truly profound technology that is having an enormous impact on the economy, on government, and on our institutions. In many respects, it represents nothing short of the second era of the internet. For 30 to 40 years, we've had an internet of information, which has transformed information industries like publishing and media and search. And now we have a new medium for value, a way to move and store and manage assets digitally and peer-to-peer, without the need always for a trusted intermediary. In the same way that the internet allowed us to move information peer-to-peer, blockchain could potentially revolutionize financial markets, supply chains, anything where assets play a critical role, which it turns out is basically the entire economy. They say blockchain is a team sport, and it's true. In order for the technology to reach its potential, different disparate stakeholders need to all get on the same page. And this is something that is getting a new sense of urgency, as unlike the first era of the internet, blockchain is truly global in nature. Whereas during the 1990s, most internet connections were in the United States, Western Europe, Canada, and so forth. Today, the entire world is connected. Whereas in the 1990s, most of the venture capital was concentrated in California. Today, it's much more widely distributed. And unlike during the internet age, blockchain, because it's impacting value industries, is intersecting with governments and regulators in a way that the internet never did, or at least not to the same extent. So this is something that is global and diverse and is going to require multi-stakeholder solutions. It's not just entrepreneurs or business people that will need to lead the charge. It's academia, law, governments, regulators, and central banks. So the idea of creating associations to help to bring together different groups of people in search of a common cause and set of objectives is crucially important. Associations advocate on behalf of industry. They can develop policy. They have the ability to convene different stakeholders who may have different objectives or different levels of interest or knowledge in these areas. They're able to craft and develop messaging, and in some cases even fund projects, create joint ventures, and actually develop businesses. This is a very important time in human history, and one that I think we need to get right if we're to ensure that blockchain reaches its full potential. And to make sense of all of this, we are very fortunate today to have an expert panel that is global in nature, I think in keeping with the truly worldwide phenomenon that is blockchain. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelists for today. Our first panelist is Merrill Ford. Merrill Ford is the Manager of Emerging Opportunities at the Next Generation Enterprises and Institutions Cluster of the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research in South Africa. Merrill has always been passionate about the power of technology to change the world and was responsible for the initiation of one of the first ISPs in South Africa in the 90s. Merrill's current focus is in the use of emerging technologies such as blockchain, big data, AI, and the Internet of Things, combined with promising new business models in stimulating and supporting technology innovation. After writing a white paper for the CSIR in blockchain and its potential, she was asked by the South African Department of Science and Innovation to develop a national blockchain strategy for the country, focusing on research, development, and innovation. Her proposal to take an ecosystem approach to create the South African National Blockchain Alliance, or SANBA, was endorsed, and SANBA was launched in April 2020. She is currently working on a blockchain strategy for the African Union. Our second panelist is Renata Baiao, who's a judge from the State Court of Sao Paulo, blockchain researcher in the Blockchain Research Institute, Brazil, one of our affiliate organizations in Latin America. Besides being a judge in Sao Paulo, Renata is also a blockchain researcher at the Blockchain Research Institute of Brazil. She is an author, and her article on blockchain and Brazilian data protection law was chosen as a recommended study on the subject by the Superior Court in Brazil. Since 2018, Renata has taken part in a series of events, either as a lecturer, teacher, or panelist on several institutions in Brazil and Europe. Always curious about the legal impacts of technological evolution, she has focused her research and studies on improving efficiency and access to justice, privacy, conflict resolution, human rights, and their interactions in a constantly changing world. And finally, very pleased to introduce Tanya Woods, who's the Managing Director Canada for the Chamber of Digital Commerce. She's been a great collaborator of the BRI, and in our home market of Canada has worked very closely with us in helping to steward the discussion with key stakeholders in the country. Tanya most recently served as the Interim Executive Director for the Blockchain Association of Canada and is a champion for Canada's digital innovation ecosystem, both domestically and globally. Tanya has held a senior level position in that industry, representing national and multinational organizations in the telecommunications, technology, and entertainment sectors, including with BCE Inc., Microsoft, and Nintendo. She has also advised and represented the Government of Canada in global trade negotiations and on the growth of the country's blockchain ecosystem. Tanya is a global public speaker and published author with degrees from the London School of Economics, Ottawa University, and American University Washington College of Law. She was named among the top 10 leading tech women in Canada by the Government of Canada, a trailblazer by the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, and a top 40 under 40 in Canada's capital by the Ottawa Chamber of Commerce and the Ottawa Business Journal. So thank you everyone for joining us today. Let me start with Tanya, because we've been collaborating for some time together, and I'd like to understand, why are associations important in helping to drive this industry forward?
It is the case that when industries are starting out, they're often very young and small. There might be large players involved in industry, so you could have big corporates that are well established, but you could also have 1- and 2-person companies, or you could have academics that are innovating in their labs, and it's a mishmash, if you will, for lack of a better terminology. However, what happens at that very precious moment in time is discoveries are made, learnings are happening, and advances are happening. And they're not happening in any kind of centralized, controlled format. They're very decentralized, which is what we love. But the messaging and the experiences do cross over, and they start to solidify experiences and challenges. They'll identify risks and hurdles in such a way that in order to get any kind of industry support to grow, particularly if it's going to land in a regulated space, there needs to be some ongoing discussion with regulators and government. There needs to be information shared, and it needs to be shared from a broad group of people. Government people and regulators don't have time, frankly, to sit with 700 innovators who aren't totally sure what the whole picture looks like. However, associations serve that wonderful purpose of cohesiveness, bringing the story and the people together. And associations typically help identify the overarching challenges or opportunities that are presenting, especially in early industry. So in Canada, for example, we had quite a lot of activity very early on in blockchain with both Bitcoin and Ethereum. And the innovation pathway went incredibly fast because of the global interest and global uptake, but our regulatory and government systems didn't respond in turn. And that was, I think, largely because there just wasn't yet a formalized trade group to communicate the urgency with government effectively and quickly enough. So it's certainly an essential purpose here. Our industry here is coming into its own again, hopefully. It can catch the wave of next level growth and next level innovation, and our regulators are paying attention, and our policymakers hopefully are soon to follow suit.
That's very interesting. So, the Chamber of Digital Commerce in Canada represents industry, right? You have membership that consists of companies, both big and small. And one of the objectives, as you laid out, is to provide a sort of a unified message and sort of set of goals, right, that you hope to achieve in interacting with government. Merrill, you're coming at this from a different angle, which is that unlike the Chamber, which is an organization representing industry, SAMBA is inside of the government itself and has a set of slightly different priorities. So can you tell us a little bit about the origin of SAMBA? How is it that the government of South Africa decided to make blockchain a priority? And what do you see as your key objectives inside of the organization that you've begun?
Okay, thanks, Alex. Well, we came to it from a need within government to actually drive innovation. So our Department of Science and Innovation drives technology innovation in the country at the moment. And there were already quite a few activities happening around Internet of Things, around big data and data science and AI. So they were kind of looking for something they could do in the blockchain space, because part of their mandate is to actually alert other government departments to potential new innovations that could be used for service delivery. So it kind of was driven from government, although, we did do a lot of pushing from our side as well to kind of explain what blockchain was and what the opportunities were. We spoke to a lot of players in the industry, mostly startups. Obviously that's where blockchain has really taken off. And we were lucky enough as well to have quite a forward-thinking Reserve Bank. So the South African Reserve Bank has done some amazing stuff with regard to blockchain in the fintech and financial space. So, for example, they've set up a regulatory sandbox environment for innovators to test their ideas in. But the focus was very much on, in the country, was very much on kind of the cryptocurrency use cases. And we felt quite strongly that there were other use cases. So we're driving kind of the non-cryptocurrency, fintech use cases within SAMBA. The aim is basically to connect as many people in the ecosystem as possible. So we've taken a very strong ecosystem approach. We've identified what an ecosystem should look like, and we're basically looking at where the gaps are and how we can help support filling those gaps with different activities. So yeah, it's been an amazing few months. We've been pulling people together. Lots of exciting things happening there.
Well, that sounds very interesting. I'm hearing a common theme, so far from Merrill and Tanya about the need for governments and regulators and central banks, these stakeholders, and who are either regulators or decide on regulations as policymakers to understand this technology. Renata, it might be helpful for you to explain a little bit about your background, because I think you're unique in the group in that you're a judge in the State Court of Sao Paulo. So you're not a regulator. In fact, you'd be someone who may be adjudicating on a case that determine regulations, which is obviously a very important role. And I think that the state of Sao Paulo is very fortunate to have someone who is thinking about this technology. So can you tell us a little bit about your role? Which hat do you want to wear? Do you want to wear the blockchain researcher hat, or do you want to wear the judge hat? Maybe you can give us a perspective from both.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've always enjoyed technology and technology evolution, as well as the way it combines with law, since law doesn't have the same speed as technology evolution. So sometimes it's really hard for people who work with law to deal with technology innovations, because it happens alongside our needs and our perspectives, making our lives more efficient. And when I started studying blockchain, it was actually a game changer, because we can actually improve people's lives in a very intense way. But as it always happens with new technologies, some stakeholders look at it, they don't trust it at first, So I really wanted to show people that technology works and technology has a purpose, and we can now come to a second era of the internet and make a good use of it, and bringing people actually accessing a lot of new values and rights, as human rights, as identity, as financial inclusion, as e-voting, as taking part of the government and making their wills actually acknowledgeable through a technology that actually is well fit for those purposes, as none has ever been before. So I've really been working on actually teaching other fellow judges about the technology, how it works and how it, what are their purposes, so that there are no misunderstandings, for instance, with data protection, just to show them that blockchain is actually compliant with GDPR and the Brazilian data protection law, as long as you watch for certain particularities and a few design principles, and you observe data privacy and privacy by design concepts. So sometimes when you hear about blockchain, people talk about crimes and criminal activity and money laundering, but that's not actually a rule. The numbers show that the use of blockchain has brought a lot more efficiency to the processes than to the criminal processes itself. So I've actually been a very active voice on bringing those concepts to light, you know, and actually stimulating the discussion, because the discussion is very profitable for law itself and for ethical deployment of the technology.
Well, you made a number of very interesting points. The first one that you started, which is that law doesn't have the same speed as technology evolution, and of course that's true. And you know, it may feel like a setback sometimes, but it's probably a good design feature, which is that the laws are not constantly changing. If they were, then industry participants wouldn't know where they stood. So the laws change infrequently, and when they do, it's very important that they reflect these new realities, right? You know, there's a risk, of course, of inaction on behalf of lawmakers and regulators, but there's also an equal risk of creating the wrong kinds of rules and regulations that can have unintended consequences. In the blockchain space, we saw this with the BIT license in New York State, which basically just duplicated the regulatory burden for companies and made it harder for startups to operate in the state. And in other technologies, we've seen this before. You know, the example that I like to give in speeches is the red flag laws, which came into effect in England, Victorian England in the 19th century, which basically said that in order to operate a motor vehicle, a horseless carriage, as they were called, you needed to have not one but two people. You needed to have a driver, but you also needed to have a red flag man, which was basically a person who walked in front of the vehicle, waving a red flag to make sure that horses and pedestrians weren't scared. So when you think about the underlying technology of the automobile, you know, the ability to move freely about the world, to do so, you know, quickly and more efficiently, having someone walking in front sort of defeats the purpose. So I think we should be very vigilant about making sure that red flag laws are not created for this industry because regulators and policymakers don't really appreciate or understand, you know, all of the complexities of the underlying technology. You know, what's really great about this discussion is that Renata and Merrill, you know, you are in two of the largest so-called emerging markets in the world. You know, in the BRICS, you're the B and the S, right? And you mentioned a couple of these issues which are really important, like financial inclusion, property rights, and so forth. You know, Tanya, in Canada, we're fortunate that we have pretty broad-based financial inclusion, and you know, the issue of property rights is not something that's a big priority. So, what are the what are the issues that really resonate with government when you're crafting a message and you're going to, you know, MPs in Canada or to the regulatory agencies? What are the things that you're really trying to get across to them to make them see the potential of this technology?
You want my secrets, Alex?
Always.
No, look, it is the case first and foremost that we need to educate them. So before I craft a hard ask, it's helping them understand what this is. And we have to appreciate that there's very few people in this world that if we said, can you explain to us how the internet works, they would actually be able to do it. And so, of course, there's a major leap in understanding this technology because it builds off of internet technology. We talk about decentralization and nodes and encryption. I mean, right away, those words, blank stares. And so trying to explain, look, we can make supply chains more efficient. We can make track and traceability capacities improved. We can help logistics, whether you're moving planes, trains, people, what have you, we can see that. We can enhance privacy. We can enhance data reliability. All of these sort of pieces in a world that is, certainly our government is concerned always, and the world is increasingly aware of fake news built off fake data. I mean, how do we understand the world around us in an honest, trustful way? Blockchain becomes a very compelling technology for this. And of course, you end up having to get into a little bit of the weeds of how it functions for them to understand, generally still resulting often in blank stares. But the biggest thing that I focus on at the moment with them is around digital identity and safeguarding the privacy and protection of human rights. It is still applicable here in Canada. You are citizens, whether you're a citizen in this country or another, and who owns your data, accesses your data, influences the data created about you is very, very pertinent because it interfaces with AI and other technologies that are built to predetermine and pre-assess who you are as a person, whether it's to banks or to schools or to whomever. So really getting at some of these deeper issues, while they may not have the answers, encouraging them. Our core ask is please engage us in the conversation. Please don't say, this is too hard and we can't think about it. And please don't oversimplify or misanalogize what this is. And unfortunately in Canada, I mean, I think it's certainly the case, there's been an oversimplification of blockchain technology as cryptocurrency and Bitcoin. And it's just been piled into security regulator purview. But this is so much bigger than security regulators. So it's really saying, look, you know, we can't keep passing it off to the securities regulators. That's dismissing your responsibilities. It's time to focus on what's going on realistically here in our country, but also for Canada, we're a trading nation. So we interface with all of the other nations in the world in some form or another, and they're advancing blockchain technology far quicker than we are right now. So it's very important that they're engaged with us and talking to us.
Yeah, a couple of great points there. I mean, I think you're absolutely right that the default is to pigeonhole this as a securities issue, which is unfortunate. You know, of course, blockchain is going to have a big impact on the securities industry, you know, raising funds for new businesses, securities tokens. I do believe some digital assets should be qualified as such. But even within the existing landscape, there's so much of it that's not captured or shouldn't be captured by securities law. And then to think about what happens in the future, probably the majority of use cases for the technology will have nothing to do with the securities industry at all. And the second point you made, which is about, you know, how does Canada as a trading nation fit into the global landscape? You know, one thing that I think is clear from the past few years is that startups are seeking out jurisdictions that have the rules and regulations that are the most clear. I wouldn't even say the least strict. I would just say the most clear, where there's visibility in terms of what can be done and what can't be done. You know, we have a wonderful researcher at the Blockchain Research Institute, Primavera de Filippi, who wrote an excellent white paper about this. And basically she says, you know, because laws move slower than technology, it creates a period of regulatory uncertainty. And in that vacuum, it's difficult for innovation to occur because startups don't know where they stand. So figuring this stuff out, or at least being clear on how the existing rules should apply to all sorts of industries, whether it's securities or otherwise, I think is very critically important. One area, though, where it's clear that governments are looking beyond securities, and I think this is a relatively recent phenomenon, is in the area of central bank digital currencies. And Merrill, I was hoping you could share a little bit of your perspective on this because of your work with the South African Reserve Bank. And also, I should add, your work within the African Union, because South Africa is one of the leading economies in the continent. I think does set the tone for a lot of what occurs in that economy. So can you tell us a little bit about the efforts of the South African Reserve Bank as it relates to this industry, and specifically to the idea of applying it to fiat or national currencies?
Yes, I can tell you a bit about it. I mean, there was basically a tender process that was issued to look at a central bank digital currency for South Africa, but mostly for kind of commercial use, not for as an individual currency. So a lot of that, unfortunately, is happening behind closed doors. So I'm actually not quite sure what is happening there at the moment. I know that they're hard at work at looking at this whole environment, as are quite a few countries within Africa. I think Rwanda is busy looking. Kenya is busy looking at opportunities. Mauritius is doing amazing things in terms of kind of wanting to become like a fintech hub for blockchain in Africa. And they're working quite hard on the different regulations as well to make it more attractive for companies, for blockchain companies and startups to move there. I actually know quite a few startups from South Africa who've actually moved to Mauritius. But yeah, so I can. That's as much as I know, unfortunately, at this stage. I think we need to wait until the whole tender process is complete, until we, I kind of do know some of the. Well, I know kind of who the successful tenderer is, but I don't think I can divulge that here at the moment. So yeah, there's a lot happening there. We are very lucky in that our central bank is very forward-thinking. There's some great people who really understand blockchain inside and out, which is kind of unusual. And as many of these initiatives happen, it kind of comes from the techies at the bottom and works itself up to management. So we've got some very good technical people that are working on issues within blockchain and CBDC.
It sounds like it. And just to draw a comparison to Canada, the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research sounds. Is that part of a ministry of industry or innovation?
So we, the CSIR kind of emerged after the Second World War. There were similar initiatives around the world. You have the CSIRO, which is in Australia. So it was kind of the old Commonwealth countries. India has a CSIR as well. And it was basically a push to continue with a lot of the research and innovation that happened because of the war. We report to government, although we're not government. So they do fund us to some extent, but only about 30% of our funding comes from the Department of Science and Innovation. The rest comes from research outputs and innovation outputs. So the focus now at the moment is kind of, we've gone through a major restructuring, kind of focusing on 4R topics and the importance of 4R and Industry 4.0. So there's been a major change in the types of research we're going to be doing. So we were kind of more academically focused in the past. We are now becoming more industry focused in a lot of the research and development we do.
That's very interesting. Renata, we spoke a little bit at the beginning about your thinking around the law, and you've obviously got lots of experience in this area. But what about the Blockchain Research Institute in Brazil? Tanya and Merrill have talked a little bit about how they're trying to advance certain objectives within government. What is the response, or what has the response been within Brazil? To be honest with you, I know that you guys are doing great work, but you don't hear a great deal out of the Brazilian government as it relates to this technology. So maybe you can help shine some light on the state of affairs.
Okay, sure. I guess that in April this year, the government has actually published a law implementing the digital government, and one of its strategies is using blockchain. We have already a few in the government that use blockchain, but most of those ideas were actually collected on contests. So there's a very interesting project concerning identity. It's not like a social number, it's more like a person register number towards the IRS, the local IRS, but they are going to connect several areas so that we can have our borders a lot more suitable for exchanges, for supply chains and import and export and things like that. And it's been going really well. We've got a few initiatives for public investments, and concerning BRI, we are BRI Brazil. We have been researching a few initiatives concerning supply chains in the agribusiness, and as well as horizontal and distributed initiatives for collective intelligence. So it's been a very interesting way of working and bringing up new ideas and new ways of working and building this intelligence towards a new technology in a way that we have all those processes documented, and that knowledge is not wasted or missed between papers and things like that. That would be something that would be actually a waste of everyone's time, as in a centralized process. So we have been trying to work in a distributed way to actually enhance the initiative in Brazil.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's been really interesting, and towards the government, things are actually being built and happening, but a little bit behind the curtains. We hear it on forums, and sometimes someone says something, and we can hear something on the news. But I think that they are kind of afraid of saying the word blockchain because the cryptocurrency that sometimes comes about. So, but it's been going on and working really well. Actually, the BNDES token, which is the development bank here, that has been working with a token, and we've got transparency on their fundings and on their donations and things like that.
Interesting. You know, there's a recurring theme there, Renata and Merrill. You mentioned that a lot is happening behind closed doors. And when things happen behind closed doors, you just have to take their word for it, I guess, that it's productive and it's, you know, trending in the right direction. Of course, that's not always true when governments are doing things behind closed doors. Tanya, I'd like to think that in Canada, you know, we're a beacon of transparency, and you know, there's lots of interactions happening with different stakeholders. But I get the sense that there's also a lot that's happening behind closed doors here in Canada that probably should be happening in the open. Can you tell us, just from your own experience, what's the tension like, or, you know, how do you resolve those kinds of issues? Because I think that, you know, transparency is the best disinfectant, you know, for all sorts of manner of activities, whether it's what's happening in a business or marketplace or inside of the government. And I feel like there's a bit too much secrecy, and which is ironic because this is a technology which, all things being equal, should improve transparency and auditability and accountability. And yet so much of the innovation seems to be happening, or so much of the policy making, I won't say innovation, but on the government side, seems to be happening behind closed doors. Can you talk about your experience?
Yeah, sure. You know, I had an early engagement with our Department of Finance working on AML rules, and I thought that consultation, frankly, was run really well. It was consultative. There were meetings, there were roundtables. It was handled in the way that it normally would be. However, because of the disbursement of power at different points of review, so for example, our securities regulators are provincial. They're not generally federal. There's even the case of siloed government departments at a federal level. So they don't talk to each other. I had run a small little study across the treatment of cryptocurrency in several different situations, and I found that there were 7 different treatments across 7 different departments and 7 different definitions of what is a virtual currency. So here's the thing.
Were any of them remotely useful or accurate, or were they all wrong?
No. They all like over highlighted one aspect or another to suit their purposes. And here's the thing: decentralized power, decentralized information, decentralized, authenticated, trustful information. It levels a playing field in a way that silos can't stand upon it well. Silos of existing systems fail. You can't argue with fact. It's very difficult. And so when you start to expose fact in such a way that it's near to undeniably true, you all of a sudden dilute power that is built up in certain silos. And governments, for better or worse, are incredibly hierarchical. So here's the thing. It's not often the case you'll see a CEO talk to the part-time cleaning staff member and say, look, I've got a serious problem in my company. What do you think about it? I have no idea what to do. It does relate to cleaning. You're the actual expert. Can we have a chat? That doesn't happen. I mean, almost never in the world does it happen. And it's very much the case here. The government leaders, the ministers, I mean, I met and I know many of them, and they're wonderful human beings. They're generally very open to discussions, but their jobs, even as defined, are misaligned to this whole evolution. They only look at making certain kinds of decisions, and then they rely on everybody below them to inform them on how to make the rest of the decisions. And it is certainly the case that everybody below them is going to end up hitting one layer of bureaucracy or another, so that misinformation is permeated throughout. You have all of these misconceptions and misperceptions of what is blockchain, who's involved. I mean, it's still the case. I get told, but isn't this criminals avoiding taxes? And I just go like, no, this is so much not that. There's that, but that's not this. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the bloody internet. Isn't that criminals trying to evade taxes too? Like, it's nonsensical stuff. So the issue here really is you have a confidence issue around the technology and leaders being comfortable speaking confidently about it and asking questions in a way that won't make them look dumb. And then you also have a bunch of misinformation on it and self-proclaimed experts inside institutions that frankly don't know anything about it because they're not talking to the industry and they're not building it. So we've got to get past our cultural hangups and our ego kind of hangups. And I've made this point many, many, many times before. This isn't a place to decide that because I'm in job X with title Y, that I know everything or that I can't ask a question. This is a place where everybody needs to collaborate and participate in dialogue, and very much openly, so that we're all getting at least a sense of what's actually happening out there, and not, a one-page brief of what somebody way down somewhere else to the left thinks about what's happening down there, who's never really even been to the conference nor built the technology or touched it. So I think, from a government perspective, I've been a very strong proponent, and I continue to be a very strong proponent, that hiding behind the government silos and the government office doors, and now maybe not doors, but it's unacceptable. It's certainly unacceptable, and we have to actually come and talk to innovators and ask honest questions, and not come at them with threats and fines and all of these other kind of hang-ups. Alex, I'm incredibly passionate about this particular topic, so forgive the rant, but I think it's a venue to make it.
Well, as you know, Tanya, I'm sympathetic to your cause, very much so. And you mentioned a bunch of interesting things there, but one of the things was, you've got these elected officials who are, beholden to the people who put them into power, but then you have this vast government bureaucracy that actually sort of operates the government, develops the policy, and puts it into effect, right? And so there's this strange disconnect where, the minister, and I've noticed this, may wave their arms and, speak highly of innovation and changing the world. But when it comes to putting the gears of government into motion to actually affect change, it can be surprisingly difficult. Maybe not surprisingly difficult, but it's difficult. You mentioned also that there's this issue of this education mismatch, and I think this is a theme that we've talked on a few times. So maybe I'll just ask if everyone could respond to this question. What are a few things that policymakers can do to become more informed about blockchain, other than buying my book in massive volume? Merrill, why don't you start off?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a big part of our focus, especially this first year of Sandra. It's in education, and just making policymakers and government officials aware of what the possibilities are with blockchain. In a weird kind of way, the whole COVID pandemic, I think, has kind of made officials really realize we need to do something differently. We've had massive cases of corruption, of food not getting to people, food packages, etc., procurement issues, all kinds of things. So there's a big focus in government at the moment on kind of how can we create the post-COVID world. And what my message to them is, we need to actually start using these technologies that have the ability to actually start reinventing the post-COVID world. So we try and organize various workshops and training sessions. We have another one in November that's specifically focused on government officials. And, we're going to be pushing the whole agenda of, you can do this better. You can actually, there's a tool that can help you manage corruption. There's a tool that provides trust in government, because trust in government at the moment is incredibly low. I mean, we're all still kind of at home, social distancing, working from home. Billions of money has disappeared. So, the time is right now to actually see something amazing coming from government and something, unique and that can actually truly change the way things happen at the moment.
Yeah, okay. I heard from that education and personal use, and
yes.
Helping to help them understand its direct applicability to the functioning of government.
Yep.
Which is something that I think is really important, right? Because we talk about how are we going to create policies and regulations and so forth for industry participants, for companies that are operating in this space. But what's equally important, I think, is to help policymakers realize that, no, this is actually a tool you yourself can use to improve the functionality, metabolism, trust in government. Renata, what about you?
Well, I think, education is one of the core foundations, but I think that maybe we can approach this on another way, because sometimes when you say, okay, you're going to actually pay less to have information, reliable information. We are going to spend less public money on having reliable information. So that is something that should be broadcasted, and sometimes I don't see that, and people don't really trust when we say that, because people don't see the numbers, people don't actually think that there's something behind it, and that's not the case. When you show actually the numbers, it's amazing the economy you can have on public resources and avoiding redundancies and things like that. In other expenses, for instance, in health solutions with blockchain, you can actually avoid redundancy on health exams and things like that, because you have one, and that's available to everyone, for the patient, for research, for the doctors, for the pharmacies, for the laboratories. So actually, there's an actual value that you can measure in your currency. That's an actual advantage, and I sometimes I feel that people don't really realize that. So blockchain is sold as the protocol of trust, and it is the protocol of trust, but it actually will help the government save money. So I think that sometimes people would need to be aware of that, on the education focus. You could be, okay, we're going to save you money. Hear what I have to say,
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I think people in government care about that, but they know that their voters care about it.
Yes.
And so being able to say that this is going to, impact the bottom line, so to speak, of the public purse, and may, I don't know, have an impact on taxation if we can do things better.
Yes.
Is certainly motivation for any elected official to take it seriously. Tanya, from your experience, what are the best things that policymakers, regulators, other stakeholders in government can do to overcome their fears and concerns about this space?
I mean, look, I think my other colleagues have given some very good ideas, so I don't want to be repetitive, but at this stage, even looking at a place like Canada, I mean, we tout ourselves as a digital innovation nation, and we're trying to attract investment and whatnot. But the regulatory hurdles that are there are they're difficult to inspire investor trust. Right now, we need money in this sector. We need to be innovating. We need the public to put some money into it. And I do think the points on, the government benefits, we can certainly be leveraging public-private partnerships right now and funding them through the public purse. This is really like, until you're building something with someone, that's how you learn, frankly, best of how it works. You learn what questions to ask. You touch the technology. It's more than just receiving Bitcoin in a wallet, for a campaign, which is one of my favorite tactics and happening with our sister organization in the US. I love this campaign, but really, some people need more than reading. They need more than even just trusting what other experts are saying. They need to touch the technology. And I think, Alex, BRI, I will absolutely give a shout out to you and to Dawn and the team. And Hillary, you've done a beautiful job. I remember when I picked up Blockchain Revolution, and was just reading, and I thought, I get it, because I come from the world of peer-to-peer technology. I come from a world where intangible assets move around and can be tracked and traced, and where they aren't well tracked and traced, corruption happens. But COVID right now, for every reason, governments need to be innovating better systemic solutions, even if it's only to clear up dangerous, medical exchanges of maybe masks that are not actually certified medically correct, which is happening, and it's harming people. These are intellectual property issues, fraud issues. What more do you need, than the public safety to cause a reason to think through a better solution? So being there, I think our job as associations and leaders in thought and in practice and in research is to show up with use cases to say, look, this is exactly where you should put it. But one of the best things they can do, frankly, is fund it and innovate alongside, innovators in the space.
Well, those are some great points. I'm more familiar with the Canadian landscape than I am in South Africa and Brazil. So, I would add to that there probably shouldn't be multiple provincial securities regulators. It's not at all clear why.
I agree.
A province with a population of, Toronto suburb has its own securities regulator. A national regulator and a national unified strategy around this, I think, would go a long way to clearing out some of the confusion. And I also agree with you that in the United States, where capital markets are deep and where venture capital is extremely mature, there is often enough money in the private sector to fund innovation, though. If you look at innovations like the internet, the government was instrumental. If you look at the space program and aerospace, it was instrumental. So I think it's a bit of a red herring, the idea that everything only happens in the private sector in the US. But in countries like Canada and, I would add, South Africa and Brazil as well, I do think the government should play an active role in funding these initiatives. And, in Canada, to the government's credit, they've made innovation a priority and they've decided to back artificial intelligence and machine learning and quantum computing, which I believe is the technology of the future and always will be. But I think that that's a joke. But blockchain, I think, is one of those things that should be included in that. This is something that, as Merrill has said, could have a direct impact on how governments function, making them better and more transparent. Could help to spur an innovation economy in countries like Canada, South Africa, and Brazil, who are all actually and have been historically largely dependent on exporting natural resources. And I think that this is a very unique opportunity for countries outside of the traditional centers of innovation like the U.S. to really put a stake in the ground and establish themselves as a beacon of for capital and for innovators and entrepreneurship. And I think that associations are all playing a really important role in that. And I think that your roles and what you're doing to advance the industry, to help educate policymakers, to shape the discussion is really critical to that. So I'd like to say from the bottom of my heart, thank you very much. This was a really wonderful discussion. We're all better off because we have people like you fighting the good fight. And we look forward to supporting you and continuing to work with you long into the future as you try and move the ball forward in a positive way. So that concludes our session. Once again, thank you, Merrill, Renata, and Tanya for your generous contributions, and hope to see you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.